This happened 3 years ago. We wanted to build up our team, so we decided to go camping. The place we need to camp is a big open space, and to get there, we had to walk through a forest full of trees. I'm not very fit, so I had to stay behind. I was out of breath, but I could still see my co-workers. After walking for a while, I got a message that said we could stop for a while and then keep going. I can't see them anymore, but I'm sure I could easily follow them because the trail is clear, even though the plants are thick. I didn't stop to rest because I was determined to catch up, but a few minutes went by and I still couldn't see or catch them. I also think something wasn't quite right. I got another message from them saying that they were now moving. The person who told the police about it said that it would take about 30 minutes to walk there. I had been walking for more than half an hour. I noticed that the trees I passed just a few minutes ago are the same ones I'm passing now. I put my bright orange pen at the start of the trail as a sign and to make sure I wasn't just imagining things. I walked for a few minutes, and when I saw the pen I had just left behind just a few meters ahead of me, I was scared again. I tried to calm myself as much as I could. I told myself to just walk straight, because I might have been walking in circles back then. I told my co-workers that I needed their help. After that, I went on my way. I'm not sure if it's just fear or if there's something else going on. When I was there, everything seemed so quiet, even a little bit strange. I can't hear the wind blowing through the trees or the birds singing. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart and my own steps. I haven't walked that far yet, but I could see the pen in front of me again. Even though I was walking the same speed, it took me less time to get there this time. I asked my co-workers to look for help, which was very important. Some of them would come back to help me, I was told. I started walking along the same path, and told them about the pen I had left behind. They told me to just keep going down the path, but they seemed confused. It's the only way to go, and I'm still not sure how I got lost. On this path, it's almost impossible to get lost. When I was talking to them, they told me that they had found the pen and were wondering where I was. I couldn't even say anything. I asked myself why I couldn't see them, like there was only one trail and the pen was behind me. I began panicking. I even thought about leaving the trail to try to find a way out of this mess. I was told to stay right where I was. They would still try to find me. Even worse, they split into two different groups. The first one walked toward our campsite, while the others kept looking near the forest's entrance. Even though it was already late afternoon, there was still no sign of them at all. So, I took one more step toward the campsite. I almost went crazy when I saw the pen right where I had left it, and the trees were still the same. I kept going back to the same place. At that point, I gave up and went back to the forest's entrance, where there was a cabin where I could spend the night. I'm so scared and tired that I can't take it anymore. If my co-workers had already found the pen, I don't know why it was still there. Also, I was too scared to pick it up. I walked for about 15 minutes before I heard someone call my name. I ran toward the sound and eventually found my co-workers. I still don't understand why they went back to the entrance of the forest to look for me. They told me they were going to the camp, so they should have passed me on the way to the entrance. I have shivers down my spine from crippling fear, so I try to stay as calm as possible. They took my backpack and led me to the camping spot while I kept my eyes on the path. Even the trees looked familiar, but the pen was gone. I asked him about the pen they had found, and they gave it to me. I don't know why I saw it once. At the time, we had already passed that point, and I thought we would just go back. But in just a few minutes, we were out of the forest. I agree with great joy. I couldn't do anything that night because I was sick. Still, I was too scared and tired. I tried not to think about what had just happened too much. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to go to the bathroom. I see a person walking outside with naturally long arms. The full moon cast its shadow on the side of the tent. I made a list of everyone inside. We were 10 and there were only 10 of us. There was no one outside. All of the people were in their tents. I never woke anyone up because I was afraid it would make them pay attention. I also don't have the guts to look at it to see what it is, so I just left after a while. I was no longer able to fall back asleep. I just kept everything to myself. After the team building exercise, no one would believe me anyway. I never really got over how I felt. I'm always worried and stressed out to the point where I can't even work right, so I decided to give myself some time off. I resigned. On my last day of work, one of my co-workers came up to me and told me that she had also seen it. I've always thought that the thing outside my tent had something to do with what happened on the way to camp. I might never find out the answers to my questions, but I also wouldn't want to. I just want to forget about everything and act like it didn't happen. In life, that's always easier sometimes. When my family went to see my cousins in their farmhouse in October 2009, something strange happened. We can't explain it, we can't prove it, and we can't even believe it. Most of the time, the event feels like a dream or a nightmare, but it really happened. It happened many years ago, but I still get painful goosebumps when I think about it. Here's what's going on. My uncle is an investment banker, and I think it's safe to say he's doing well. Their farmhouse is about the size of a mansion, and the ranch that surrounds it is big. How many acres? Only God knows. Basically, if you stand on the balcony, you can act out that scene from The Lion King when you were a kid. Even though my sister Jenny, my cousins Nicole and Max, and I are all pretty much adults now, we still went on vacations to the farmhouse. We used to get together at least once a year at the farmhouse until last year. At this point, my uncle sold the land. Everything about the farm was great. It was outside of town. There were a lot of them, so they could play all kinds of games inside and outside. It had probably been explored by a lot of people in the past, who had probably cut paths through the forest. Everyone spent weeks at a time on the ranch. So, over the many years we went there, we explored a lot of the outer woods and got to know most of the paths like the backs of our hands. Through our many adventures, we found a clearing in the forest about 200 meters away that was a great place to watch the sunset. Well, we can't really stay in the forest until it gets dark. So we haven't seen the sun go down from there, but we still called it Sunset Point. The four of us would often bring our lunches there and have little picnics. But the rule was that we had to be home by 5 o'clock. No later. Nicole, who was the oldest and bravest of us, used to argue with our parents almost every vacation to let us watch the sunset from Sunset Point at least once, but they always said no. I didn't understand why we couldn't stay in the forest past our 5 p.m. curfew. Since there weren't any big animals there, I didn't get it at first. But now I do. Whether they're haunted or not, force are scary, dangerous, and full of things you don't know and don't want to know. My parents, along with my uncle and aunt, had to go out of state in the winter of 2009 to spend a day with our grandparents. After hours of pleading and crying, they reluctantly agreed to let us all off the farm if we promised not to stay out past our curfew or, burn the place down. At the time, I was the youngest of the four, and Nicole was the oldest at 17. Everyone just assumed that we would be able to take care of ourselves and make smart decisions. They made a mistake. The first thing we did was decide to finally go to Sunset Point and watch the sun go down like we had always wanted. After the adults left, Max suggested that we each pack a backpack and make plans for the next day's adventure. He and Nicole put snacks and bags in their bags. Jenny packed some games, and I put fruits, cards, water, and the flashlight and batteries in my bag. Any other things we might need the next day. With high hopes and a lot of excitement, we started our adventure. Now, our parents were supposed to come back with our grandparents by the afternoon of the next day. So this was the only day we could have done it. We messed around all day until about 5 p.m., when we went to Sunset Point. It took us about 20 minutes to get there, where we played some games and sat on the cool grass while the sun was still up. Max had brought me a Mars bar, which I ate as we all watched the sun go down. It was a beautiful sight. After all this time, the Sunset Point really lived up to its name. We ate the forbidden fruit and it was worth it, or so I thought, because as soon as it got dark, Jenny got impatient and scared as we started to walk back. So I took the torch out. This was when things really started to get weird. The trip home seemed to take a lot longer than it ever had before. Even though it hadn't rained or been that cold, the ground felt wet to my shoes. Then, God, there were sounds. Even the sound of the wind and the rustling of the bushes sounded like footsteps and whispers. I like to think it was just the wind, but it could have been footsteps and whispers. We were all pretty scared and ran as fast as we could back to the house. I was in front of the group, walking quickly with my own flashlight, when Jenny tapped me on the shoulder, which made me jump out of my skin. She slowly told me, on the verge of tears, that she thought someone was following us. To be honest, that thought scared the crap out of me. But my sister was crying, and I wanted to do everything I could to reassure her that we were safe, so I and the others stopped. When I turned around and looked back, I moved everyone out of the way and pointed the flashlight back in the direction we had just come. It's just the wind, Jen, so calm down. I was telling her about it when it happened out of the blue, which broke up my sentence. I saw that the shadow of a man waving his right hand was made by the light from the torch in front of us. I didn't have anything in front of me yet. The light from the torch cast a shadow on the ground in front of us. I stopped in shock. I've never been more scared. It felt like my whole body was out of my hands. I wanted to throw up all of my organs. I was so scared that I turned around and took a step back. Everyone was looking at the shadow and feeling the same horror that I was. Most likely, when they saw me move, they woke up. And we ran. We ran, cried, and sped up until we got out of the forest. When we finally got to the farm, everyone was still with us and no one was lost. I don't remember what happened right after that, but for a few days, we were all very sick. We didn't tell our parents until just recently, and they didn't believe us, of course. I can't say they're wrong. I would also choose not to believe it if I had the choice. We never went to the forest again after that. I missed all of the fun things we did there. The forest has always been our fifth friend, but it scares me to think that all along we might have only had 1/5 of a friend. We'll get this straight. It turns out that one of the original owners of this farmhouse on the ranch killed himself by shooting himself in the head back in that same spot, which we now call Sunset Point. His body wouldn't be found for months, and he was supposed to have died in 1919, which means only one thing. We met the spirit or ghost of the man who used to own that land but has since died. I guess this won't work. So, here's the story of my first and last time camping. I never went camping when I was a kid. It was just something my parents never did and tell their children not to do. That was never much of a nature person, either. Since I grew up in the city, my life was mostly just concrete and a few parks here and there. I grew to love these places because they were my home, but I never spent too much time in nature outside of my own bubble. Most of my friends were kids who lived in the same area as me. We both grew up in the same places I just talked about. 2 or 3 years later, I turned 30 and didn't want to have a party to celebrate. I was getting bored with my old life and wanted to try something new, but that's not the point of the story. One of my friends, let's call him Mark, suggested that we try something new and go camping over the weekend. Now, I met Mark in college. He was always the happy-go-lucky type, so my group of friends welcomed him right away. He hasn't been camping in a long time, but I love it. My other two childhood friends, Steve and Jake, have not been camping very often at all. Kind of like me. So it sounded like a really cool idea. Mark would be our teacher in a way, and we'd get to spend some time away from the noise and crowds of the city we live in. Mark went shopping for equipment. We bought 2 tents for 2 people each, sleeping bags, and some other gear. On Friday, we got everything ready to go north. It was early September, so the weather was nice. The days were always warm and sunny, and the nights weren't too cold because Paul hadn't arrived yet. It seemed like the perfect place to drive to if you wanted to get away from the noise and busyness of the city. Once we got there, the plane was supposed to get there around 6 in the evening. Set up camp and build a fire so we could rest and stay warm for the rest of the night. We stopped at a gas station about 2 hours into our trip to get some snacks and drinks for the rest of the way. We all got out of the car and walked around for a while in the middle of nowhere. This seems like the perfect way to describe where this gas station is. The right side of the road was where it was. We just pulled up and left the place, which seemed strange. The only person there was the clerk. I've been curious about who let this poor, sick man work here. He worked on our order for about 10 minutes straight. And he kept staring at Mark in a way that seemed like he was really focusing on him. This made all of us feel very uncomfortable, so Mark went outside and waited for us in the car. We were on a road that wasn't very busy. Only 4 or 5 cars had gone by us, and none of them were in the same lane as us. We were the only people who went north on that stretch of road in a car. I only say this because, while Mark was waiting outside, a red truck drove quickly north past the gas station. It was the only car we'd seen all day going in that direction. Because he changed, the clerk thought that the red truck was fine. He looked surprised and a little lost. We got what we needed and soon after left the gas station. As planned, we got to the campsite around 6 in the evening. Mark was so happy that we were all coming to visit, and he showed us how to set up our tents and get ready for a fire. We needed some wood for the fire. Mark and I went outside to get wood. I went for a walk and looked at the beautiful scenery. I think it could have been a turning point in my life and the start of a new one that I had longed for. If it weren't for the noise behind me, I still wouldn't know what to say. It was loud, but at the end, it was kind of hard to hear. I said Mark's name, but no one answered. I turned around to look for him, but I couldn't find him anywhere. This wasn't a very thick forest, though. If he had gone in any direction, I could see him, but I can't. And I only turned my back on him for about 30 seconds. I even looked up into the trees because I thought he might be playing a joke on me and trying to scare me. But no, he was just gone. I decided it was probably best to walk back to camp and see if Jake and Steve had seen Mark, but they said he hadn't come back before me. We waited for him for about an hour, and the longer we waited, the more scared we got. By now, we've gone through every possible thing that could have happened in our heads. It didn't make any sense. I even thought about walking out onto the road and asking for help, but it was getting dark and we didn't want to put ourselves in danger of anything else going wrong. So we didn't split up. Likely a good idea. We couldn't just get help and walk away from the site. We also didn't have enough courage to go out and look for him. So he didn't go. At this point, it was probably around 10 p.m., and the three of us were crammed into one tent. About 50 feet away, we heard another loud thud. We went outside and saw a drunk man stumbling towards us. We were very confused. When he woke up, he didn't seem hurt, so we asked him where he was and what had happened. He didn't seem to know how to answer any of our questions, so we left the campsite to let him rest. As soon as we thought he was okay, I took us home. It was quiet on the way back. I drove by the gas station quickly, and this time the clerk was standing outside and staring at us. I don't want to go there again ever. Mark told us a little more about what happened on the back now that his memory was coming back. After I turned around, he took a step, and the next thing he knew, he saw a big hairy thing coming toward him. He said he woke up in an animal's den, where there were bones everywhere and a strong smell of blood. He heard growling and was scared. He woke up, pulled himself up, and ran out of this small den, which he said was a small cave whose entrance he could see as he ran away. He said he felt like he was high and drugged, like he had been given some kind of sleep aid. After what seemed like hours of wandering. Most likely, it was only a mile or two away. He found where we camped. He doesn't remember much else, but whatever he saw scared him, and as far as I know, no animal can scare people the way it scared Mark when he was growing up in Jersey. I had heard about the Jersey Devil, of course. If I said that, I would be lying. I always knew what every legend was really like. As the story is told from one generation to the next, it gets more and more messed up. When I told my friend Tony at school that I was going to spend the night in the pines, he laughed at me because he thought I was making a joke. After I told him I was serious, he put his hand on my shoulder and got very serious. "You must be kidding, right?" He did so. I nodded my head. "Man, you really shouldn't go there." I've heard stories, and even the way he said it told me this wasn't a joke. He really was scared. I wanted to ask him what kind of stories they were, but the bell went off and we both had to go back to class. The day was over. I got in my car and drove to the Pines. I put my camping gear in the back of the car so I could leave right after school. It was morning. I wasn't scared, and nothing scary happens during the day. In the end, I thought it was a good idea, so I set up my tent and sleeping bag and went out to the Pines. It was lovely. I lived in New Jersey my whole life, but I never got to see this place. How is that possible? I thought it had been a few hours since I had set up my tent. I'm reading a book and having a good time. Even though it's not yet night, it's clear that the sun is going down. Usually, I'd be too scared to sleep alone in the dark woods, but I bought some melatonin and sleeping pills, so I wouldn't be awake long enough to be scared. I reached into my bag and pulled out the bottle of pills. I felt around, but I didn't feel anything. I started to freak out after about a minute. I took everything out of my bag and looked through the mess. Not one. I put my feet up and chewed on my nails. Something I haven't done since elementary school. I kept thinking about what Tony had said, and his warning kept going through my mind over and over again. I lifted my head up to see how much sun I still had. The answer, to my surprise, was none. I didn't expect it to be so dark. I closed the zipper on my tent and got under the blankets, even though I knew there was no way I would sleep. My eyes were closed for about an hour while I was under the cover. I was embarrassed that I was hiding under the covers like a little kid. But Tony's fairy tales got to me, so I got my book and decided I might as well read. When I tried to turn on the portable lamp I had, I heard a very clear hissing sound. I have frozen fear and am cursing under my breath because I forgot to take my pills. But when it stopped raining for a while, I thought it would be a good idea to open the tent and see what was outside, assuming it was gone. It wasn't, and thank goodness it was facing the other way. It almost looked like it was out there looking for something. I opened the door to the tent and crept as quietly as I could. It didn't hear me, and I think he or she just kept looking away. As I pulled my leg out, I kicked one of the tent poles, which caused my tent to fall over. I rolled quickly and got behind one of the many trees nearby. I heard his footsteps and hissing as he got closer to the tent, and I put my hand in my mouth. I didn't realize how loudly I was breathing at the time, but it must have been right next to my ear in front of the tree. I heard some hissing and what I think was sniffling. Before anything else could happen, my phone went off, stopping the hissing. I got up and ran away before I became the next meal. I made some noise, but I didn't think it heard me over the alarm. Even if it did, he didn't care. I felt like I ran for a long time before I ran into two men who were dressed for hunting. They laughed at my panic and asked me what was wrong. They even had southern accents, but they weren't from around here. I asked, "Who's out there?" When I told them what I had seen, they said it was the Jersey Devil. The noise. After looking at each other, the hunters walked into the trees. I shut my eyes and tried to stop my heart from beating out of my chest. I just sat there by myself for 10 minutes thinking about what to do next. I hadn't heard of anything, so I started to wonder if I could have just made it all up. Have I gone crazy? Did I make a monster because I was afraid? When I heard a gunshot and then another one right after it, I knew it was real. I smiled. They understood. I thought my smile would soon go away, and I thought I had heard a loud scream from beyond the trees. I shut my eyes and held on to the locket I had around my neck. Then again, in a clear way, I could hear the hiss. I turned around and started running again as fast as I could. I climbed back up the trail to where my car was parked, opened the door, got in, put the keys in the ignition, and spread out all the way. When I got home, my mom was surprised to see me. I ran up to her and gave her a big hug. I was glad to see her again. I never went camping again after that. I can only think that what I saw scared me away. The Jersey Devil did exist, but it's hard for me to say that my name is Andrew. A few days ago, my girlfriend and I went camping with another couple in a mountain park in Canada. Melissa and Shirley were talking while they were making dinner. Matt came with me to get wood for a campfire near the tents. We need to use our small hatchets to cut up some wood and use the time to gather food for everyone. Matt asked me if I had been camping before and if I knew how to start a fire with a candle or matchsticks. I told him no, because it couldn't be that hard. We kept cutting wood and sparking material. Almost all of the afternoon had passed. We went back to meet the girls because our bags were full. We heard screams and calls for help while we were walking, so we stopped to see what was going on. The girls were not where the sounds were coming from. When we got there, the scene was even worse because it was getting dark. We watched as wolves ate and tore apart a whole family. The mother lost all of her looks. The father's body was broken, and the boy and girl, I don't even want to say it, were frozen with fear. Matt was paralyzed with fear, so I slapped him in the face and told him to get out quietly. When we got to our campsite, we told the girls about what we had seen. They were afraid. Now things start to change. We saw wolves that were not like most wolves. They were huge, walked on two legs, and looked like they were ready to tear anything apart. They look like they are part man and part wolf hybrids, which may sound crazy to the girls. They believe what we said, and we're not quick to dislike what we said. They were scared and said it was probably best for us to leave. We knew it wasn't okay for us to be in this park. We had to get going. Now we could hear the howling in the distance, and it was much louder and deeper than any wolf we'd ever heard. Now, everyone was scared, breathing heavily, and waiting for something to happen. It was also already very dark outside. We didn't want to be stuck in the woods with those wolf-like things or whatever they were this night. So, after doing our best to hide our cries, we found a small cave where we could hide until morning, when it would be safest to move on. I told my friends that this was probably the best way to get through the night we were in. It was just a tiny little cave. I believe. We all fell asleep because we were so tired. When we woke up in the morning, there was just a little bit of light coming in. We all left and are trying to get back. Now we were lost and couldn't for the life of us remember where our original campsite was or even where we had entered the park. We might as well have been in a whole different park. Everything around us, from the trees to the background and scenery, looked completely different and foreign to us. We were really starting to worry. Even though we found some park rangers, it turned out that we were nowhere near Canada. We were in the lower part of Wisconsin, which is in the United States. We thought he was making jokes to trick us. But when we talked to him, he seemed very confused by our accents and by the fact that we kept saying where we were from. We couldn't have been camping in Canada, and then all of a sudden be in southern Wisconsin, in the United States. This made no sense at all. We only knew that we had fallen asleep in the small cave to get away from these wolves or whatever they were. And the next thing we know, we wake up in a state and country we have never been to before. How this can happen? I don't know, it goes against everything we know about science and physics. I don't think the park ranger really believed us because he thought we were acting weird and probably thought we were all on drugs. After several weeks we managed to get home. But it was really, really hard. Looking back, I feel like I've been in a Twilight Zone episode. I don't know how else to explain how we got from one state to the other by some miracle. None of it makes sense. And sometimes when I think back, I wonder if we all had a mass hallucination or if it was just a group dream or nightmare. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, this happened. I used to go camping a lot with my youngest aunt and my cousin. My aunt is only 8 years older than me, and my cousin is 4 years older than me. They will be called Anna and Martin. No, those aren't really their names. My mom is from Argentina, so when I was young, my dad, she, and I would travel once a year to see her family. They have a farm on the edge of town, and I was often allowed to play outside as long as an adult was there to watch me. There were dogs, horses, and chickens, for example. I thought it was pretty safe and hot at the time. We've been there for Christmas and New Year's Eve. The problem is that none of my cousins like me because I live in the city and am not from here. So Anna and Martin were easier to get along with because they were responsible. My parents didn't mind when I followed them around, especially my mom. We'd walk around the country with the dogs following us, watch movies, or camp out, but we'd always stay on the farm and never get too close to the border. There is a national park near the area. So it has a lot of places for tourists to camp and do other things. I think my family told us to be careful, but I'm not sure. Since it is so close to the national border with Brazil, and like many places where countries meet, there were stories about drug trafficking, women and children going missing, and gun trafficking. So, one night, Anna and Martin asked their parents if they could take me camping with them and the kids from next door. At first, they didn't want it. But a Brazilian woman who was a parent told them that they would always look out for us. We drove to the campsite, but camping there wasn't allowed. It was like they drove us to the middle of nowhere. They took their dog with them. I knew something wasn't right, but Anne and Martin didn't say anything, so I went along with it. Even the neighbors didn't look suspicious. In fact, we spent the whole afternoon helping set up the campsite, learning how to cook, and complaining about the mosquitoes. There is something bad called dengue fever. Normal camping staff sat around and listened to the parents' stories. What's scary at night? Our parents had 2 tents, so they split us up. So the mom would sleep with us girls and the dad would sleep with the boys. They didn't want to scare us. It was more like talking until we fell asleep and didn't even realize it. I was woken up by voices that were slurred. I remember feeling very lost and trying to get up to help Anna, but she told me to be quiet. Aunt Anna told you to be quiet. You just did what she said. I also told the other girl, who was younger than me, to be quiet. So it was dark and hot in the middle of the jungle, and then I heard the dog whining and barking desperately. Weird noises came from the things we had left packed. Someone or something was walking around, throwing our things around, and breaking plastic bottles and packages. I was scared because even if it was an animal, we had no way to protect ourselves. There were stories that jaguars would attack naive travelers. It was clear that an animal looking for food was coming to our camping spot because of the smell. We had just kept quiet like the adults didn't do anything. We had no idea if the boys were awake or not. I just did what the adults told me to do, and I will never forget what happened. I'm sure we all saw a strange shadow against the tense material. We thought it was a big cat or some weird animal that crawled on all fours, its elbows and knees, or something. But it was not a big cat. They were strangely twisted and looked a little bit like people. The body had strange proportions. It was thick and the body parts seemed to be too short. It had round ears, and its face looked a little bit like a cat's. The dog started barking very loudly, which I think the boy didn't like at all. When the thing got close to the tent, we all heard Dad yelling angrily. The boys got out of their tents when they heard strange yelling sounds coming from whatever was crawling towards us. The mom then leaves our tent, and Anna and I immediately follow with the girl because we couldn't stay in the tent alone. After all of that, the adults talked with each other. They all thought it would be best to just go back. We didn't like it at all when we heard sounds coming from the trees. Was there something strange? The dad said that he and his friends always camped there and that nothing bad ever happened to them until that moment. We were such curious kids that we started to push him to tell us what he saw. The same thing happened with Martin and the son. There was a mix of fear and morbid interest. I can't even begin to explain it. It was like something was so ugly and shady that you can't look away from it. Martin was pale and serious, and all he told us was that it wasn't a jaguar but something else. The adults were busy packing up the things, calming down the dog, and keeping an eye on the youngest child to make sure he or she didn't run away. She wasn't a stupid person. In the moments after the event, we didn't talk much about it. The parents were very serious, and I'm pretty sure the dad told the mom something they didn't want us to hear. It wasn't a person, or an ordinary animal. And, man, I was frozen at that moment. My brain couldn't fully understand it until later, so they drove us to their house. We went back to my grandma's house the next morning. We left the campsite at night. I remember Anna and Martin talking. Even though the animal had black spots, it was not a jaguar. It wasn't a normal animal because no animal moves like that, and it wasn't a person either. Everyone was shocked, and my dad was a little upset. My grandma was the only one who was shocked but not angry. Folklore from the area talks about a man who looks like a jaguar or a werewolf. My mom can tell me the name. As a child, she heard scary stories about it that were meant to keep kids from going outside at night. Some kind of shaman who changes into a jaguar and eats people. Just a little bit like an American Indian werewolf. Grandma said that this creature was to blame when farmers found dead chickens, dogs, and other animals that had been killed in a cruel way. No matter what. I think the noise is good luck. The neighbors who took us home so we wouldn't have to spend the night at the campsite. There was something very bad moving around us. Dad was crazy when he took us to a better place. Please be careful if you decide to go camping. Go to safe places. You can never be sure what you will find. This is a story I heard from my grandfather when I went to see him over the summer. I'm in high school, and my best friend and I went to visit my grandfather in the Philippines. He lives in a small village. We had never been to this place before. The village was in a remote area near a small mountain with a forest all around it. There was a lot of grassy land between the houses, and my grandfather lives alone in a cabin-like house. My friend and I wanted to go outside one night after dinner to find a better reception. In this faraway place, there was no Wi-Fi, but the signal was strong in the morning, as if we were connected to Wi-Fi. As we were getting ready to leave, my grandfather yelled at us to stay in the house. We were quite spooked. He always had this look on his face. After a few seconds, he told her that it was dangerous to go outside at night. He said that some people had been lost. I asked him why. He said, "Malik, no. Around here, these beings are evil spirits that live in mounds, old trees, or even big rocks in the Philippines. People also call them a common myth. I've never seen these things, so I don't believe him. I thought that these missing people were probably taken by other people and not by ghosts, since we don't believe he told us to sit on the wooden couch. He sat down in front of us and told us a story slowly. It gave me chills. Grandfather said that when he was young, just a few years ago, a monster almost took him away. When he was 23, he and two of his friends decided to go camping on a mountain near the village. They did this every year, so they knew the area and the terrain of the mountain pretty well. They got to the place where they always went camping. A small shed made of bamboo was built in the area. When things calmed down, so they decided to look around. When they did, they found 3 mounds that hadn't been there before. Grandfather and his friends believe in things that don't make sense. So they didn't worry about the mounds because they thought the Molyneux was reciting some of them. Grandpa told us that he had a friend named Danny who didn't believe in such things. Danny was bored and decided to poke around the mound with a stick. Danny stepped and jumped on it to make a point. No such thing as a signal exists. Grandfather said that he, the others, and Danny ran back to the cabin. When they got back to the camp, they kept talking about what his friend had done that night. They think this is a natural sound, like a broken radio putting out a high-pitched sound. It was loud, so they all woke up and went to see what was going on. even though they were scared, that wasn't the scariest thing. He said that they couldn't move or even make a sound, and he could still remember looking into Danny's eyes. He could see that Danny's lips were shaking, as if he was trying to open his mouth. The flame in the gas lamp they were using started to flicker, and the fire went out. Grandpa said it was at this time. He could feel his heart beating so fast all over his body. The door to the shed then opened all of a sudden. From the inside, the door was locked, but it opened without any trouble. Then, strange sounds came from many different places. He heard footsteps and felt something grab his legs. He said it didn't feel like hands, but like giant vines wrapping around his ankles, and he slowly lowered his face. He was so scared that he almost passed out. He put his face on the ground, but he didn't feel a thing. After being pulled for a while, they stopped, and the strange sounds started up again. This time, Danny's squeals made him sound like a pig being killed. When he woke up the next morning, that was the last thing he could remember. He was pulled a few meters away from the shed, as it turns out. He said that when he woke up, he had a bad hangover and had to throw up. His friends and he talked about everything that had happened and agreed that it was all true. He tried to find Danny, but nobody saw him. After thinking about everything, they decided that the Molyneux had taken Danny. When they got back to the village, they told the other people. Danny's grandfather told them that Danny's parents had tried to get their son back by giving gifts, clothes, and alcohol to the Molyneux, but their requests were ignored. Grandpa looked at us and told us that the same thing is happening now in that village. A few kilometers away, there were 3 mounds. If they took a certain path, it would take them there? It looks like some kids who were playing nearby destroyed one of the mounds. The cancers are still trying to find the ones who did it. The next morning, my friend and I decided to follow the road our grandfather had told us about. We found it in the middle of a grassy plain. 3 large earth mounds were set up so that they almost made a triangle, and one of the mounds was tilted and looked like it had been worn down. There was no moss or small grass growing on the mounds, so they were clean. There was also a perfect circle with neatly trimmed grass all around it. We took a picture, and then our phones started acting up. And there was this high-pitched ringing. We were scared, and our hearts were still beating fast when we got back to Grandpa's house. We didn't sleep well that night, so we decided to go home the next day. After a long time of thinking about it. Most likely, this was an alien and not a bad spirit, but I'd love to hear what you think. What do you think happened the year before this? My friends and I decided to go camping in the nearby mountains in April. Since we had nothing to do for school that weekend, a lot of people like to meet up in the forest on the mountain. 6 of us were going, and we were going to stay the night. We planned it quickly, and I was very excited to go. I hadn't traveled in a while. I brought way too many things for just one night, but I didn't know what I would want to wear or how cold it could get at night. So it worked out. We left around 3 p.m., after getting ready and meeting at the station. So, we'd be able to get there by 4 and get everything ready for the trip. We took 2 cars and 3 tents of about the same size. This way, each tent could hold 2 people. We got to the mountain on time, left our cars at the end of the road, and walked about a mile into the woods before finding a good spot. We put up our tents, made a fire, and put up lights. Now, the sky was getting darker. The mood was fantastic. We fooled around a bit and even got drunk, and then we played Truth or Dare. And finally, around 10 p.m., my friend Jeremy suggested we tell some scary stories. Amy and I were the only girls there, and I was the only one who thought it was a bad idea. I get scared easily, but I went along with it because of peer pressure. After all, there probably wasn't anything to be scared of, especially in a group. While Jeremy told us his scary story about something supernatural, I almost thought I heard something break in the woods. I looked behind me, but there was nothing there. When they asked me what was wrong, I told them nothing was wrong. Somebody else most likely heard it too. I wasn't too interested in the scary stories, and I'm sure I made something up. I didn't want to worry too much. Jacob was Jeremy's cousin, and Jeremy brought him with us so he wouldn't get bored with his family back home. None of us really knew him. He was actually very cute, and Amy and I tried to flirt with him every chance we got. Then, out of the blue, he asked me to help him set up the blankets in the tent. He probably saw that I was getting scared while they told me their scary stories. I thought he liked Amy more than me. They were always talking to each other, but I couldn't wait to get away. The guy was hot, so when I got the chance to be alone with him, I jumped at it. It was like killing two birds with one stone. When we finally got to his tent, I was so happy. It was all planned out, which meant that he just wanted to be alone with me. He told me that he could tell I wasn't happy with how things were going, even though I seemed nice. So, he wanted to go somewhere where he could be alone. The tent wasn't very private because everyone else was only a few meters away. We decided to go for a walk. It seemed like a good idea because we would get to know each other. We told everyone that we would probably come back once they were done telling all these stories. When I looked at Amy, she just winked and smiled at me. It was very relaxing to talk to Jacob, and he seemed very smart. He told me about college and asked if I had a boyfriend. I told him I didn't, so I was very happy when he told me he didn't have a girlfriend either. When he kissed me, things moved quickly. No matter how much I liked this guy, I didn't tell him I was cold and we should probably go back to the tent. I was a little bit drunk and we had just met, so I couldn't let things change or go any further. He agreed that we should go back, but he asked me if I wanted to switch tents so I could stay with him, and we could get to know each other better. When we got to the tent, he asked me if I wanted to leave and go to his apartment. I didn't feel like I could do anything there now. This kind of gave me the creeps. It was 12 o'clock, and we were in the middle of nowhere. But I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I made up a story that Amy didn't like sleeping with anyone else, so I had to go back to my tent. So I went back to my tent and told Amy what he said. She agreed that it was spooky. Even though Amy went to sleep and I stayed on my phone for a while, we didn't try to make anything out of it. Jacob asked me if I was sure I wanted to stay here instead of in his tent when I heard someone outside my tent. I told him I was, and he just looked at me for a minute with a weird smile on his face. Then she just said okay, and left. I had no idea what to think about it. So I tried to go to sleep, and a few days later I had really bad herpes. I went to see a doctor to find out what was wrong. The first doctor I went to asked me if anyone close to me or in my family had died recently. I said no. My grandmother died 10 years ago, which was the last death in my family. He then asked me if I had kissed anyone recently. I remember that Jacob, Jimmy's friend, was pretty much the only person I kissed in the last 4 months. I didn't know his full name when he asked me for it. I told the doctor I could find out what he needed to know. I didn't understand. He must have been sick or something, because he gave it to me, but I didn't know why he wanted his name. 2 police officers showed up and asked me about the man. Since I didn't know much about him, I just gave them Jeremy's number. I didn't know what was going on, and the doctor just told me to go home and get some cream. I asked him about it at school the next day. What he told me still makes me feel scared. I had a very rare kind of herpes that was passed on by bacteria and a dead body. The doctor saw it right away and sent police to Jacob's apartment to see if there was anything like him there. When they got there, they found a girl's body. She was the only person I had ever kissed. 3 weeks had passed since she was last seen. No one could find her. No one thought Jacob was behind it because they didn't know him. I couldn't believe what I had heard, and I couldn't help but think that I could have been her and gone with him to his apartment that night. Every day, I thank God for my good sense and morals. Since then, Jacob, you've been a creep, so let's not meet up again. I chose to go camping with my family a few months ago. We had been looking forward to this camping trip for a long time, but our parents' busy schedules kept getting in the way and making us change our plans. Before my dad told us we were going camping this weekend, my siblings and I were about to give up. My siblings and I were very excited, and they had been looking forward to this trip for a very long time. Mom and Dad had planned the campsite, and they had marked the perfect spot. We all looked forward to the weekend, and when it finally arrived late Friday afternoon, we all yelled with joy. We're heading out. I was more calm than my brothers and sisters. They were so rambunctious that Mom had to threaten them to get them to stop making noise. We drove for 30 minutes to get to the campsite. It was near the woods, so the scenery was great and the vibe was great. Even though I liked everything around me, I felt a little uneasy in the woods. I felt like I could still sense this presence. It made me feel spooky and spooky. I just gave my head a light shake and tried to push the thoughts out of my mind, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. We get our camping gear out, and I set it up. I helped set up the tents with my dad. Everyone in my family helped my mom get things out of the car. After a while, everything was set up, and we were ready to start camping. When we were done, it was getting dark, so we huddled together by a fire because it was getting cold. My mom gave us the snacks she had brought with her. Everyone ate a lot. My brothers and sisters asked me to tell them some scary stories, and it was like a reflex that my mind went back to the presence I felt earlier in the day, sending a chill through me and making me shiver. I wanted to stop my dad and tell him it was a bad idea, but I didn't. My father and mother told a lot of ghost stories, which scared my siblings a lot. It was hard to get them to go to sleep, so I moved a little farther into the woods to go to the bathroom. I had too much water to drink. I got the light and went into the woods to go to the bathroom. After walking what I thought was a long way, I squatted down to pee and felt like someone or something was watching me. This time, the chill I felt went all the way to my bones, unlike when we first got there and it was just on the surface. I felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been dumped all over my body. When I turned around to look, I was surprised to see that no one was there. When I turned around to face the front, it was right there in front of me. I was stuck where I was. I didn't know if he was scared or just surprised. I had no idea. I couldn't think of a name for it. It wasn't that much like a person. Was for sure. I let out a scream, and the last thing I could remember before I passed out was seeing bright lights. When I woke up, I was tied to a chair in a bright room. There were machines and tools all around me. At this point, I realized what was going on. I was taken away while I was trying to break out of my chains. Someone brought one of these things. It was interested in me, and touched my face. Its hands were as cold as ice, and every time they touched my skin, I felt chills go through my body. It came about because of this. Then it moved toward one of the computers and did something to it. This thing was making all kinds of strange noises, and it almost sounded like it was talking to itself. I didn't know why, but electricity started going through my body in a violent way. After a while, the shocks stopped, but I felt numb all over. When I turned around to change my direction, it felt like I was being poked by 1,000 needles at once. When I looked up and saw these blank faces staring at me, I felt terrified and the pain in my body got worse. I thought my mind was going to break in two. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity because of the hellish pain, he finally got up. I went through what I think were a few more tests before it shook its head and walked out of the room or something like that. A few minutes later, it came back with some other people who also had blank faces. Those people did. They all looked at me and started talking to each other again through telepathy. I know because I could hear it every time they did it. It was like I could hear a conversation in a room, but the language was strange and I didn't understand it. I blacked out again and woke up at our campsite, where my parents were there to protect me. Surprisingly, our trip was over, and it was already Sunday afternoon. With worry, I've been gone for almost 2 days. I told my parents about what happened, but they laughed at me and said I didn't go anywhere. I was there the whole time we camped. They both noticed that I was sometimes forgetful and acted in a more mechanical way. Other than that, I was there for everything. So they think that my story about aliens being taken away was a lie, which makes sense. It was hard for them to believe. Of course, they didn't believe in aliens or any other extraterrestrial beings, or even the supernatural. But despite what they said and what I went through, I'm sure that what I went through was real. So, about 4 years ago, my best friend Julie and I went to summer camp together. I was only 13 at the time, and I was glad to get away from home for a while. It was very important. It was my first time at camp, and the only reason I went was because Julie was there. Back then, I was also very shy. So it wasn't easy for me to make new friends. The first few days at camp went pretty well, but on a hike through the forest, Julie tripped over something and broke her ankle. Her dad had to come and get her. The day after I was left alone there, I called my mom and asked her to come get me. I didn't have any friends to hang out with or talk to. She thought it would be good for me to be forced to make new friends. I was sharing a tent with Julie, but when she left, I had to sleep by myself. I'm not going to lie, though, it was pretty scary to be there by myself at night. I kept hearing sounds coming from everywhere. There was never a real calm. After sleeping alone for 3 or 4 nights, I got used to all the noise and was able to fall asleep quickly. I woke up one night to the sound of someone or something walking around my campsite. The steps were very slow and heavy. I thought it was one of the male camp counselors because he was a little bit bigger, but I still felt a little uneasy and scared. I decided to stay awake until the person who was walking around went back to their tent or wherever they came from. But they didn't. For more than an hour, I could hear them walking around. I finally just fell asleep at one point. After what seemed like a few seconds, I woke up to the sound of 2 loud footsteps coming toward my tent. Very quickly. It sounded like someone was coming at me quickly. I set up my tent so I could see the silhouette of a person walking right in front of it when the footsteps stopped. But I didn't see anyone. It frightened me. Just think about hearing someone run fast toward you and then not seeing anyone. The worst part is when the feet stopped moving. The person left, but I didn't hear them leave for the rest of the night. I felt like someone was watching me from right in front of my tent. I just can't get rid of it. The rest of that night, I didn't sleep well and couldn't move at all. I was afraid to make any noise that might wake up whatever or whoever might be out there. When I heard everyone wake up and get out of their tents in the morning, I finally felt like I could move again. I asked my camp counselor right away if I could move to a different tent. I didn't feel safe enough to stay alone for another night. I didn't go camping again for a while, and I still blame Julie for making me have such a bad time. I never told her about it, though. I won't go camping ever. No one can convince me otherwise. And after that night, I told myself I would never sleep in the cabin again because that night changed my life. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My friends said we should go, but at first I didn't want to because I was afraid of the bugs. They told us that we could always go back home if we didn't like it. I said yes, and they picked me up the next morning. However, my friend forgot her wallet on the way to Mary, so we had to turn around and go all the way back to her house. We finally got her wallet and went to the liquor store. After the store, we got gas and then went to the cabin, where we drank, sang, and had a good time. We stopped for a while and saw a strange light flashing from the sky. My friend thought we were going crazy because of the alcohol and the way it was making us feel. This woman showed us around the cabin and told us the rules. She said that if we didn't follow the rules, someone would come and scare us all. We soon looked at each other and clearly laughed. She was playing tricks on us. She told you that you will be sorry later. We heard a loud scream at night. We thought Mary was just playing tricks on us. Then we hear a loud bang and see kids playing around. Our friends like to joke around and pull pranks. I thought she was just messing with us. I called her name. I couldn't hear her answer. She couldn't be found anywhere. So, Claudia Perry, Jess, and Jamie all looked around, but neither Mary nor the source of the scream could be found. They took flashlights with them and went further into the woods. They lost their signal, and none of their lights worked. All of our flashlights went out at the same time, and since it was getting dark, they thought it would be a good idea to split up and look for Mary. What a terrible idea that was. We had lost our way and couldn't find our way back. Jess said that this was why I didn't want to go camping. 1 minute Claudia was next to me, and the next she was gone. I knew bad things were going to happen. Look what happened to 2 of our friends. Do you think the woman who showed us around is trying to mess with us or scare us? Aria replied, well, whatever her problem is, she needs help. Even though we didn't do anything wrong, this crazy old lady is after us. When Aria said that something broke the glass and started to choke her, we all tried to stop it. But what made it scary is that we couldn't see it. We didn't know what we should aim for. Jamie told us to call the police, and we are in a very serious situation. What will we say? If we tell them what we saw, they might be able to help. No, they will think we are all crazy like this old lady who is trying to scare us. When Jamie said that whatever was in the house got very angry and started to attack him, we tried to save him, but whatever killed him was stronger than all of us put together, and we see Claudia with her eyes cut out and her body cut into demonic sayings. There were a lot of dead people who had been cut up in the river. We can't believe what we're seeing. We had to get out of there quickly and get to the car. But we ran out of gas before we got there. There was a problem with everything. Because we laughed at that old witch, we lost 2 good friends. She had sent us her group of demons to help. I know for sure that I will never go camping again at that cabin. We are down to only 2 people. We looked for clues to figure out why this woman was so bad. It felt like someone was watching us, and at that moment, we all heard a strange, demonic voice. I told Jamie, "It's okay, Jess, I'm here." He replied, "I don't know who you are. I don't care about you at all." We started looking, and we found some books that really helped us figure out who she is and why all of this is happening. It turns out that she was taken by someone, and that person turned her evil. This guy makes her hurt other people and torture them. It felt like someone was watching us because as soon as we read that, one of our friends said, "You can't stop," in a strange, demonic voice. I told Jamie, "It's fine, it's just a joke," he said, "I'm here, but I have no idea who you are. I don't care about you at all. We knew from the very beginning. So we will do everything we can to stop you from setting other people free. They are coming for you, and they have weapons that are strong enough to knock you out so they can tell you what to do. Even though the army of demons will rise up, we will not lose. If you don't bow down, you'll try to kill yourself because the people who are angry with you are coming to haunt what's left of you. You make a good choice. You only live once, so don't end up like your dead friends." Before I could even answer, an army of bees and wasps surrounded me. These bees were not like regular bees at all, because they were evil. They stung me over and over again until I bled and passed out. When I woke up in the hospital, police and investigators were all around me. They wanted to know everything about what we had seen and who had gone missing from her group of friends. Since 2 of my friends had gone missing or were said to have been found dead, just like we had seen, we were going to be asked questions and looked into until the whole thing was sorted out. So far, that's all I can tell you because the investigation is still going on. A friend of mine told me to write this here. So I'm going to post it myself. I don't understand why. People will read this and think, "Yeah, right. I'm going to look like a crazy person here." Which is frustrating, but if we're being honest, here we go either way. Lewis wanted to go camping at the end of last summer. He found out that his girlfriend was sleeping with someone else, so he made everyone go camping with him. This helped him focus on what was important. So, because we're such good friends, we all agree, which was a bad idea in retrospect. It was a cloudy day, and McGee. The path he was leading us down was full of trees whose branches looked like they were all tangled up. If I had known that Louis had never been down that trail before, I probably would have spent less time drinking and more time tagging low-hanging branches. If I hadn't been drinking so much, I would have noticed how quiet it was. Usually, the forest was full of bugs, crickets, and bubbling creeks. But there were no sounds like that in this forest. As we went further down the trail, the grass seemed to cover up the sound of our footsteps. Connor was the first to look like he didn't feel good. He had his arms around himself as if he were holding himself, and his eyes darted from branch to branch as if he'd find something in the woods and leaves. He was the first person to ask Lewis where they were. Lewis told him that we went by this ugly rock. Hunter joined in after the first 3 times. He was always getting picked on by those 2, so it was easy to ignore. After all, Hunter couldn't still be sober enough to notice the subtleties and rocks in the forest. They were all over the forest. If we had given him a second of our time, he would have said that we took a certain tree we passed a while ago too seriously. Hunter was acting out as usual, digging his heels in, and he pointed to a rock that looked more like a boulder. It was about 4 feet away, tall and lumpy, and covered in faded chalk that looked like etchings that sent chills down my spine. As luck would have it, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and the inconvenience and irritation quickly went away. The sun had already set, and I was really sorry I had left my house. The eerie quiet of the forest and the fact that there was no sound, which I had been happy to ignore before, made my dull instincts want to run. I told Louis that we should go, but he rolled his eyes, put his backpack down, and started taking things out. If you're tired, you could say I couldn't tell you why I didn't tell you the truth at the time because I was too tired. And maybe it was because I was a man and my pride was at stake. But I opened up another beer and helped him set up the tent anyway. Connor and Hunter did the same, and soon they were laughing and teasing each other again. We got firewood and told ghost stories, and when it was time to go to sleep, we crawled into our tents. I would have taken that L, if I hadn't been woken up by the sudden crunch of leaves late at night. Only once did it happen. But when I sat up, I couldn't move because I had a sudden feeling of being hunted. I felt like a rabbit caught in a trap, unable to get away from whatever was sitting outside my tent. I tried to convince myself that a forest was full of all kinds of animals, but the silence from earlier made it clear that there were few or no animals living here. Now, as I sat in my nylon prison holding my breath, I wondered if they had just been smarter than me and done what I hadn't had the guts to do, or if they had been trapped, played with, and eaten. I tried unsuccessfully to call myself a snapping of leaves. It didn't make sense to get upset about a bunch of crunching leaves. Maybe some squirrels didn't get the message, and they were still hungry. There might have been a bear nearby just going about his own business. Even though it was almost fall, there were thousands of downed trees deep in the woods, and I still couldn't let go of my breath. I waited quietly as the back of the tent was slowly and methodically scratched by nylon nails. The sound got under my skin and made me feel like the thing was carving ruins into my bones. It went on all night, until I could do nothing but try not to cry. As I sat there with my eyes closed and my hand over my mouth, I couldn't pretend it was all a dream. Those feelings of helplessness were so strong that they were almost too much for me to handle. It made no sense. It was a waste of time to act like this was an animal. The only thing that could have been on the other side of my tent is something that either got in or got bored. I didn't know if it was crazy or crazy making, but I didn't move an inch, especially since it seemed happy to scare me. The giggles that came next were enough proof of that. As soon as the sun came up, the scratching stopped, but I didn't move until I no longer felt heavy. Whoever had been out there seemed to have finally gotten bored, shaken, and raw. I got out of my tent ready to tell everyone that we were leaving, but I couldn't get the words out. Where their tents had been, there was now nothing there. They could not be found. At my place by the fire, there were only 2 empty beer cans. There was only 1 pair of shoes outside my tent, as if the others had never been there. My investigation turned up nothing that showed I was crazy. But I did happen to look back at my tent, and I decided on the spot to leave it. They are running away in a bloody hurry. The fabric had a simple sentence sewn into it. Be glad you didn't go outside.